Okay, welcome Conrad Goodhew to the show. Conrad is a dietitian. He works with all sorts of different athletes, and today we're talking endurance sports specifically, and our three key things we're trying to manage in terms of that endurance activity is being carbohydrate or hydration number one, carbohydrate intake number two, and sodium intake or salt intake number three. So welcome Conrad. Great to be able to catch up with you and have a bit of a chat and share some ideas around nutrition.
No problem. Happy to be here.
Yeah, nice work. So talk to me about, I guess, the management of those three things. Would you say that hydration is the most important thing?
Well, I guess like anything in nutrition, this whole balance, discussion topic is around about how do we balance almost those three and how do we optimize that? I guess carbs sort of sits in its sort of own realm in terms of fuel, but also carbohydrates actually really important for hydration as well, or retaining water from that perspective. As well as sodium. We can sort of dive into that a little bit more.
Yes. Yeah. So just talking about that, by sodium, we're talking about, by talking salt, is sodium the key and the most important thing? Because obviously we've got potassium, we've got magnesium, other elements as well. Do they matter? Or is it more just we need to focus on the sodium? If we do that, we're probably going to tick most of those boxes.
Yeah, I think if we look at it from an electrolyte perspective, sodium is the most important one. So salt or table salt is sodium chloride, which everybody just knows that as, and what's in the cupboard, what you add to your potatoes, etc. Go back to the roast potatoes on the coast. But the key thing that we're looking at in terms of electrolytes, yes, the other ones are important, but in terms of what we lose most in sweat, especially during like ultra distances, is sodium. So that is the most important one we need to get in. But if we are using, I guess, just generic electrolytes or food and getting food options, we're going to get some of that other stuff in anyway. But in terms of optimizing targets or specifically trying to reduce the risk of what we call hyponatremia, which is low blood sodium, sodium is the most important thing, and we can see that quite clearly when we're reading labels because it's a requirement in terms of New Zealand policy. So it is actually quite easy to track.
Okay, nice. So I want to go through some guidelines today. So as a result of listening to our chat, to go, okay, well, that's what I need to be kind of aiming for. Obviously, this is going to be very individualized, and it's very environment plays a big part of this as well. But it'd be good to get a bit of discussion around each of these in regards to a few takeaways for people when they're lining up for their event. So let's start off with hydration. What should we be thinking about? What are some maximums and minimums, and maybe some guidelines for people to take away?
Yeah, I think like you mentioned, it's highly individual and everybody's got different sweat rates. The environment's going to play a part. But what I also see probably more when I work with clients and when we're tracking hydration is actually just because it's cold doesn't mean you're not sweating. So that's probably a really important thing to recognize, because you're normally layered up more. So we kind of see this sort of average, I guess, sweat rate, and then that once you hit sort of that 25-ish degree, that's when it starts to really escalate from there. But that's highly variable to each individual. Probably the number one thing is like you do need fluid, but that would be dictated by a number of things. Just because it's cold doesn't mean you shouldn't be drinking. That's probably the first thing. But how do we know those numbers? And it's really simple. You could literally just search up how to measure your sweat rate, and it'll jump online. You get your weight before you do any exercise, and you get your weight after any exercise. Now, you want to make sure you basically think of those as two time points. You don't want to go toilet in between those because it'll skew your results. And then what you do is you take your duration, the intensity, the heat into sort of into factors here, as well as what you consume. So if you look at the sweat rates online, you determine what your weight changes, then how much you took in would give you your total sweat loss, and you divide that by your time, and it'll give you sweat rate per hour. So for people on the lower end, sometimes in sort of colder climates, lower end would be looking at sort of 250 mils. Some high heavy sweaters, you'd be sort of 500 mils on the colder part. Then when we get a bit warmer, like that 25, sort of 30 degrees, and it starts to really escalate from there. Where I've had some athletes that are up around sort of 1.5 liters an hour. Which is a lot. So this is where it's really important. You've got to understand what your needs are by simple stuff like getting your weight before and after training. And I think I've mentioned previously as well in another podcast is the first hour we often sweat more, and then so you'll be looking at sort of like make any exercise over that hour and a half plus is where we want to really get or nail our sort of losses for that time as well. So to summarize all of that, what we want to do is if you just jump on Google, get your start to look at your weight before and after training, determine what your hydrations or your sweat rate would be per hour. It's a really good place to start to know, okay, how much do we need to take in? Because then we start to build in sodium and carbohydrates from there as well.
Yeah, nice. Okay, so weight before, take away your weight after, add in any fluid you drank beforehand, add that into the calculation on top of it, and then you're going to become a difference. Ideally, there'll be no difference because obviously you're taking your weigh the same before and after, and therefore you're managing that sweat rate is what we're after, isn't it?
Not necessarily, and that's probably a really good question. We definitely don't want to come in heavy. So we don't want to be gaining weight necessarily because you might be overhydrating. But what I like to look for if we're looking for optimum, I'm looking at around about a 1% body weight loss. Anything more than 2%, you're getting into the reduction in performance and probably some other things going on like cramp, etc. But the sweet spot is you should see a weight loss, but we probably don't want to go anything more than that 2%. Of your body weight to start off with as a sweet spot. So about around about that 1% is quite ideal to keep it around.
So grab the digital scales out, jump on before, tell yourself down, jump on afterwards, and then do that a few times in different environments so you get a bit of a feel for how much you need to be consuming in different environments. Yeah,
and if you're real nifty with Excel, you can create some beautiful, if you're visually, I guess that's way inclined, you can actually just crunch some numbers. If you build it out, you can actually get a really nice graph, which you can go, okay, you sort of see your trends or your flows over a long period of time. But very rarely do I get to that point with my athletes, but it's actually, there's an option there for those that are sort of numbers driven or quite tech savvy.
Yeah, good. And hydration is the most important thing, especially early on in your event. So up to an hour, that's the first thing that's going to slow you down. Would you agree with that? Is that correct in saying?
Yeah. Yes. I think probably, I guess, up to an hour. Did you say that might?
Yeah, to about an hour or so. Yep.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, what you want to always do is like when it comes to anything, whether it be hydrating, refueling, replenishing sodium, you got to give yourself around about sort of a 20 to 30-minute mark of when things are taken into your mouth to when it's actually available for your body. So if you're thinking, right, I might start to bonk in an hour, well, half an hour prior to that is probably the latest time that you want to be having your first option, if that makes sense. So it's always starting earlier if that's what you're going. So it's always back to absorption and how do we get that in and available.
Good. Okay, nice. Okay, so hydration. What about carbohydrate intake? What are some guidelines about how much we should be taking there? Like over the last few years, things have just ramped up and up and up in terms of you hear people taking like 150 grams of carbohydrates per hour, which is crazy. If you've ever had a try at that, through to used to be, can we do 30 to 40 sort of thing? So where are we at now? Well, obviously, it's very individual. Depends on your event that you're doing as well. What are some things we can be thinking about, and what should people be targeting in terms of carbohydrate intake?
Yeah, again, it depends. But it's really interesting. So those higher ends, there is actually some really good evidence around being higher tolerance and for that for performance outcomes. What I want to start off with in terms of, regardless of what your target numbers are, train high. It's better off training high carbohydrates and racing slightly less than what it is training low than trying to race high. That doesn't work because your body isn't used to it. So first thing, whatever the numbers are, I kind of work off a sort of a 10 to 20% less what people train at, if they are getting into those higher points as well. But if we're looking at sort of general rule of thumb, there's been some discussions around, 1 gram per kilogram of body weight, that sort of stuff as well. But there are athletes that could tolerate much higher than that. So it really comes down to what sort of gut issues you're having and why we want to train high, because they'll teach that. But my general starting point for a lot of athletes will be, okay, what's your tolerability like? But you'd be, okay, from an hour to 2 hours, you'd be about sort of 30 to 60 grams. And when you go from 2 hours plus, or even 90 minutes plus, would be looking at that sort of the 60 to 90. If you can get higher than that, and I've got some athletes that can train quite comfortably straight off the bat at 120, we start to try to sort of push that boundary a little bit and see where their sort of tolerable load is. And the symptoms that you get from having too many carbs is normally gastro issues. So normally you get loose bowels, that sort of thing as well. So if you're getting any of that, dial it right back.
Real crampy sort of stomach as well during, like, is it?
Yeah, so I think if you're getting the sort of stomach, so we got upper gastro issues and lower gastro issues. Lower gastro issues is poor absorption. Upper is probably too stodgy. So either it's like too fibrous, too much protein, too food based. So let's say you might be able to tolerate 60 grams of carbs from food, and you might pump up that other 60 grams through fluid carbs or things like gels and that as well. So whatever that looks like for you in terms of upper GI, so stomach, is when we sort of eat something and there's sort of the next 5 or 10 minutes it sits real light, we're getting reflux. That's probably sitting in your stomach a little bit more, but that's definitely a more complex discussion around how you manage that as well. Those are sort of the numbers. So start to go hour to sort of 2 hours-ish, about sort of 30 to 60, 90 minutes plus, you can start to go 60 to 90. And then if you can push a little bit higher, so be it. But like I said, always in training, train higher than what you want to race at. People go, oh, I'm only doing a 2 hour zone 2 bike. I don't need a fuel during this. I'm like, hang on, this is a great time to really challenge the carb intake and train your gut while the gut isn't under pressure. So then you can actually race a little bit higher as well, because that's normal now.
Yeah, so that simulation session is what it's about, isn't it? Actually, how am I going to do it? Actually, let's dial it in. What's the actual food options and what can I cope with here?
And that's what it's done to,
and individualizing that as well. So carbohydrate, hydration, and what about salt intake? What are some guidelines, upper and lower, that we should be thinking about in regards to sodium intake? I should talk about.
Yeah, so we're starting to get this really long trend of people that don't have enough salt and people that probably don't need that much salt or sodium in particular, especially with these new drinks and stuff that are coming out that are all like, oh, you should be having 1,000 milligrams of sodium. And it's getting to the point that it's actually probably getting a little bit beyond the perfect, or what the diet science actually says. So rather than working off per hour when it comes to sodium, we actually want to work off per litre of fluid that you consume. So if you're consuming, if your sweat rates are sort of like 700 mils per hour, you'd work off whatever salt concentration is within that, as well as what you'd be getting from carbs as well. So I think the easy way to look at it is any fluid that you take in, we've got to get some sodium with that. And the numbers that we're seeing in the evidence is around about that sort of 450, and we can probably push that up to 650. The reason why people feel better when they have those 1,000 milligram, I guess, options or plus is normally because what that does is it stimulates thirst. So because it's really salty, you got that really salty taste in your mouth, your body or brain goes, I need to drink more. So then you actually consume more fluid. In terms of like what the perfect number is, in terms of performance, it's still that sort of 450, 650-ish per litre, which is quite fascinating. And some more recent evidence with Alan McCubbin, pretty sure I pronounced that right, from Monash University, who does a lot of study in the space.
Okay. Yeah, because it's interesting you talk about different products. Like when you look at certain gels on the market and you look at their, like, gels to me in the old days anyway used to be a concentrated sports drink. So you've got the water fluid taken out of it, but you've got carbohydrates and electrolytes in there, and then you just add water because you can't carry the water with you necessarily. So, but actually when you look at some labels, they've got obviously high carbohydrates, but sodium is very minimal. So I feel like sometimes people assume that there's sodium in there, but actually there's not. We need to look at the labels and see what's actually in this thing. And therefore maybe that's where we start supplementing with salt tablets and that sort of stuff to make sure we're in that right range.
Yeah, I've had athletes that have run, those little sachets you get in the hotels of the salt. Literally, they'll run with those and just take that in because all they want to do is drink water. It's their way. It's not probably the great way of managing it, but it is a way to do it. So at the end of the day, it's making sure that when you are buying any supplement, I guess any product, food as well, flip the label over. You go, okay, what carbohydrates am I going to get out of this? What sodium am I going to get out of this? And then you go, right, what do I need to top up with a supplement my food or supplement whatever the strategy is with these little extra things. So if we think races where, like just straight water is going to be mostly available, what things are practical for you to carry that's going to enable you to top that up. So if it's scooping a cup when you're running through a river, you've got a little a packet of electrolyte tablets or salt fizzes or whatever it may be, that you take those and you can have your water, because you know that cup is 500 mils, and you know that, okay, I'm going to be looking at about 300 mils of sodium in those electrolytes. So it's just that's the way it's really important if you're looking to strategize to go, am I actually adding in salt with the fluid that I'm taking in as well? Even if it's things like Coke, for example. Coke's relatively low sodium, so it's like making sure you're taking some sodium in with that Coke, with the Coke option there too, or any other fizzy drink if that's your way.
Yes. Good. So managing those three things: hydration, carbohydrates, and salt intake. I really like the fact of managing salt intake per litre rather than per hour, because that's the thinking about how sweaty and how hot it is. So that helps us making sure we're not overdoing it either, just by blindly taking in more sodium.
Yeah, and some people go, oh, well, I need more sodium because, this sweat thing told me. I'm like, but what we know in the evidence is sodium sweat is highly dictated by your sodium intake. So if you consume a lot of sodium products, your sweat will then have a lot of sodium in it as well. So it can sometimes skew your needs and go, oh, actually, I need more sodium, but that's often dictated by how much you've taken in your habitual diet, which we get more than enough of anyway as human beings too.
Yes. So how do we know if we need to take more or less?
Well, you could spend a lot of money on getting some sweat patches and doing that, but again, we don't use them in professional sport. So you think professional sporters, we would use it. It's kind of come and gone and thought that might be valuable, but there's no evidence to really nail the sodium concentrations unless we are like super elite and super dialed in, and we want to get everything to the nth degree of 1%. But for most people that are probably doing the races that are going to be listening to this, I'm not going to be that group, so I wouldn't get too caught up in it. But if you feel like, the way I talk with my clients is like, okay, if you find that you get when you sweat, your cap goes a little bit white, you taste your sweat and it can taste a little bit salty, you might be a saltier sweater. That could be because your diet consists of more salt, which if you want to add in a little bit more and you feel that works for you, so be it. But don't think that because there's supplement discussions that are coming around, we need to be having 200 milligrams of sodium in our per litre because we are high salt sweaters, or it's going to help my cramp, or whatever this discussion may be as well. So I think that's a really important discussion to have. Hence why that 450, 650-ish is a really nice sweet spot to see where you're at. Some people may not need 450. That could be actually, in terms of hyponatremia, I think it's right down around 100 milligrams. Don't quote me on that, 100 milligrams per litre or something relatively low. So you don't actually need much to sort of stay healthy.
Yeah.
But if we're looking a little bit higher, it can actually help with the performance as well.
Yeah, good. Okay, so we're talking about performance and then just making sure you've got some sodium in your drink, and then that will mean that you'll not need to worry about that hyponatremia thing. As long as you're having something there, your body will be able to cope with that.
Yep, absolutely. And I reckon if you are out sort of doing races that there is minimal aid stations available, take some extra, I guess, options for those that probably haven't listened to this podcast either, because, a little pack of electrolytes are actually pretty easy to carry. And if you've got someone running across and look like they're not very well, give that to them, because that could be the difference between you actually saving their life or not, because that's a very high risk.
Yes, that's right. So just options. So carbohydrates, and obviously having those things available to mean that you're going to be able to have a good day and enjoy yourself out there. And as you mentioned, it's just a matter of practicing these things and keeping a little spreadsheet about what am I doing, what went well, what didn't go quite so well, how did I manage my hydration, how did I feel as a result of that, and then you can turn up to race day being well prepared, knowing how you're actually going to do this thing.
Yeah, and ballpark's really critical here, because you'll be dependent on your day. You might go, oh, I'm going to go try a race at 90 grams of carbs per hour, but you may cough up the boiled, or the boiled potatoes with salt and butter that you've got, and when you're running up Goats Pass, that's what happened to me. So it's like, how do you manage that? How do you manage on the go, especially for those bigger races too? So, having different options, 100%. Don't think it's all going to be perfect, because it's not. So it's just being able to understand concepts and understand how you manage that in your training. So then when the race day comes, you can do the best as you can with what you got in front of you.
Excellent. Well done, Conrad. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate your expertise as always. And keep up the great work.
No problem. Thanks for having me.